So I have that it's noon here on the East Coast. Marjorie's in at 9 o'clock on the West Coast. So we're going to begin. Thank you all for joining. I'd like to welcome you to our inaugural webinar sponsored by the Informs Practice section entitled Sustaining Outstanding Analytics Organizations. This is a companion to our other webinar series we sponsor called Advanced Analytics Success Stories, and we're going to alternate monthly going forward with these two series. My name is Arnie Greenland, and as a member of the board of the Informs Practice section, I'm organizing and hosting these sessions, which we'll run certainly today and often in the future as a conversational format. I'm currently professor of practice at Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. But prior to that, I was an active analytics practitioner for nearly 40 years. I retired from IBM in 2014. We are honored today to have as our guest an inaugural speaker, Margery Connor, data science and analytics advisor at Chevron. In her previous role, she focused on growing data science competency and coordinated the data science strategic research portfolio. She initiated and managed the Modeling and Analytics Center of Excellence. In addition to her technical contributions to Chevron, or in recognition of her technical contributions to Chevron, she was appointed fellow in 2013. Margery is very active in Informs, as many of us already know, and is currently president-elect of the Roundtable. Now, just one logistical issue before we start. We ask all of you to please hold your questions to the end, but feel free to enter questions as you think of them in the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. So to start our conversation, Margery, would you please share with the listeners today your analytics journey in the many years you've been at Chevron, and in particular, how your role and that of analytics has evolved?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, welcome everyone, and thank you, Arnie, for this great honor to be your inaugural speaker. I'm very honored, and I appreciate the invitation. So I feel like you and I are just going to have a conversation this morning, and this afternoon for you, and others will listen in. So I joined Chevron in 1987. I had a master's in operations research from UC Berkeley. Now, think about the world in 1987, 34 years ago. I signed on as I think the title was communications analyst, and I worked in the IT group. I monitored the data network, which was comprised of IBM mainframes. And I also looked at the voice traffic between Chevron locations to understand the demand and how and when we had to increase the bandwidth between the locations. Now, let me remind you that the voice network at the time was a microwave system, and we had microwave towers. So that's what I was adding trunks to different locations. So the world has changed dramatically since I started. But clearly, Chevron and the energy industry, we have lots of great examples and uses for operations research. So after a couple of years of checking out monitoring the data and the voice network, I moved into a team called the math modeling team. And here I really got to use as I always called it, my bag of tricks, right? Of operations research, linear programming, mixed integer, constraint programming, discrete event simulation, and later on, data mining, decision analysis, right? So my toolbox increased as I did more projects. And I was actually on that team we called it different things at different times, but for 16 years. And I loved it. I implemented a supply chain planning system for their chemical company. I built a discrete event simulation model of a tank farm for a refinery in Wales. I built a portfolio optimization system for an asset in Chevron, Nigeria. I worked on our credit card system, which we had in-house at the time, to identify fraud. I worked with human resources to do some early workforce analytics to understand the retirement of the baby boomers. So as you can see, it was very rich in multiple dimensions. First of all, the technology, applying the tools. It was also great to learn about all the different parts of Chevron's business, right? I mean, I didn't even mention other applications, right? I mean, we have a tool called Petro that we use for refinery scheduling, which is distributed recursion. We have lots of logistics opportunities. I worked on a couple projects in shipping to understand, the logistics. So great experience. It was one of those things when I started, I was a junior person on the team. And by the end, I was the person out there bringing in the projects for other people to work on. So I grew a lot, both with the technologies, with the Chevron knowledge, as well as the consulting aspect of it, right? Understanding the business problems. So at that point, the analytics, after 16 years, we're talking, 2009, and the analytics hype was in full force, right? Tom Davenport had written his book, and others, right? It wasn't just Tom, but in 2006, I think, competing on analytics, and everybody wanted, particularly corporate America, was interested in analytics, and are we using it, and how are we using it, and should we be using it more? So I was moved into a more strategic role, right? I mean, for somebody that had seen a lot of the Chevron businesses, number of different tools, I was in a good position to answer these questions. And the answer really was, well, we're doing it in pockets of the organization, right? I mentioned the refinery tool, I mentioned the shipping, but we really weren't doing it enterprise-wide. So then 2013, as you noted, I was named a Chevron Fellow, and we really started to build our data science competency. And so we hired 3 people externally. They're all still with Chevron in very different roles today. We had senior management support in that, in the earlier team, we had to bill our time. We had to do a lot of internal billing, whereas this was one of the things that helped us get the data science practice off the ground, was that we didn't have to do that. We were underwritten for a couple of years. And we picked, looking back on it, Arnie, I would say we picked some really good projects to start with. In other words, we didn't look at things like this refinery scheduling tool I mentioned, because we had a tool that solved that problem that was well respected inside and outside Chevron. We picked problems that Chevron was struggling with that we didn't necessarily know how to answer, so that we weren't doing incremental value to projects that we already did well. We were actually solving some projects that we had tried and hadn't had as much success as we had wanted to have. So that was good. The other tip is we really had to focus, right? As I mentioned, there was a lot of hype, not just externally, but internally. And we really had to say, which projects can we get done quickly and bring value to Chevron? Because, we didn't have the luxury of, even anything more than 6 months. It just was too long. We were really trying to quickly explain, what's data science, how can we use it at Chevron to bring value. So by this point, as I mentioned, there was a lot of activity in pockets of the organization. So in 2015, we pulled together a number of the internal consulting teams and created a center of excellence. And I ran it for a couple of years. This really was my first management position. I had been very focused on the technical, the deep technical, and I felt that was how I could bring the most value to Chevron. But in this adventure of creating our center of excellence, I felt like I really had the vision of how it should be. We'd had this previous math modeling team. We learned a lot from that, and I wanted to apply the good things that we had learned. And so I did run it for 2 years with the whole understanding that it was going to get big and it was going to get into a whole realm of skills that really weren't my forte. So, but the big thing that I wanted to focus on was creating the environment. Technical people, I confirmed this, as you noted, I'm on the round table. We talk about this. Technical people, what do we want? We want to be working on challenging problems, right? That flex our brains, test our brains with other smart people that bring value to the company, right? And if you can do that and create the environment to enable that, people are really happy to come to work, right? And so me and my colleagues have really focused on creating that environment. And so far, it's been good. So the Center of Excellence grew. Chevron recently went through a transformation. We've now used chapter models instead of a Center of Excellence, and so it's very much growing. I mean, when I managed the team, there were 12 people on it. Now the data science and analytics chapter has about 140 people in it, and that's the central team that's working. There are other people in other places that are doing this work. And as you noted, I'm the data science and analytics advisor now. We've started, I don't want to say we shifted our focus, but I personally, we're working on the data now. As I have said, one of the things, we had this focus on the right problems. And now, because we had this, we want to get it done in 6 months, we want to show the value, which has morphed a bit over time. But we did note that we were solving a lot of the low-hanging fruit, that we had the data available. We had the data the subject matter expert told us to analyze. We had the data that was clean, but there's probably other data out there that's going to actually bring more value to Chevron. So we're focusing on, okay, what are those opportunities? But Arnie, I mean, I look back on my career, it's not over yet. But it really is incredible. I mean, you think about what the world was like 34 years ago, and particularly in our profession, to tell someone I had a degree in operations research, people would look at me like, what? Right? Because it wasn't necessarily a good name for our skill set, right? And now you turn on the television and you see advertisements for machine learning and artificial intelligence. I mean, did you ever think that would happen, Arnie?
But no, I actually, when I think about when I started, we were sort of like, we didn't use the word business analytics, and we were, kind of
I'm
off in
very
the
proud
corner
of what
with
we have
stubby
always
pencils solving math problems. But
right. And now, lots of people want to be data scientists. So.
Okay, well, that was a great introduction. Thank you for running through that. And it's very clear that your experience was quite broad. I mean, you solved problems all over the place, and same experience I had as well. That we can't say in advance what problem's going to walk in the door. So
right.
But could you share with those on the call what you found as the most challenging problem? And by the way, it doesn't have to be a technical one. It could also be, it might be a management problem that you faced in your years at Chevron.
Yes, so I do think about the challenging technical ones, but I would agree that the big when I think about the biggest challenge, and I think you're going to laugh, Arnie, when I tell you this, but I think you'll also agree, it was explaining what it is, right? And I mean, I've even had this conversation a couple times this month when people are like, what's data science? I mean, they're not asking me anymore what data science is, but when you think about it, throughout my entire career, I've never really answered the question to the general public, right? I mean, I love informs because I don't need to explain what operations research and even advanced analytics are. But my point is, we described it and how we can, what types of problems we can use to solve, right? But I mean, other than saying we apply math models to solve business problems, okay, so that explains it, but it doesn't really, in terms of the broad tool set, right, that we apply, right? And then you kind of start to, well, there's optimization, and then there's simulation. And, I've spent my career thinking, okay, this person is in shipping. We're going to talk about examples we've solved in shipping. This person, is in upstream. We're going to talk about this. And so it has been a challenge, right, to explain what it is. And the result of that, right, we had to build credibility, right, which is good. It's a good thing. And credibility is, very fragile. So we have to maintain the credibility. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that's been a challenge, and it's very much related, is the terminology.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, we made a decision around data science. It was going to be an umbrella term. It includes machine learning and artificial intelligence at Chevron. I've been in meetings when I've said, what do you mean by machine learning? And somebody looked at me and said, I would think what machine learning is. And I said, yes, I do, but I'm asking about the definition of terms to make sure that we both understand it the same way when we have this conversation. So the terminology, I mean, we had an outside consultant come in to do a review of our work, and they said, you're doing great in data science, but you're behind in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And it's like, okay. So it's been a challenge, right?
Well, that's actually very common. The constant change of the terminology of what we do, and even within informs, it's a pretty regular point of I guess discussion. What's the right term? And
Right.
I think the right term is that it's sort of like the only thing about that we can actually count on for the future is that it's going to change as we move on. So the next question I wanted to focus on was, I mean, it's pretty well known that in a large organization, to have like the group that you created and began to manage and build out requires a lot of good support from senior management. Could you describe to those on the call the impact and commitment of the senior management at Chevron, and how important was that to your success?
So it's been critical to our success. I would say, the first math modeling team, we didn't have the support of senior management. When we started to launch data science, we absolutely had the support of senior management. As I mentioned, they, we call them angel investors, right? They were able to fund the team while we got to a point where we could explain what is data science and the value it brings to Chevron. We've always tracked how much value we bring, and that's one of the ways we communicate with management. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, and that kind of makes them ask more questions. Where's the work being done? Which parts of the business? How can we do more? But it has definitely been, they've definitely been supportive. I mean, a couple of things, and it goes back to my earlier comment about the commercials for machine learning. They're hearing, so what would I say was the difference, right? Is that, by 2013, you could open up the popular press and you could read examples of how people were using, machine learning in the healthcare industry, in transportation and everything else. And then that really made them think about how can we apply this. I was in a meeting once with a vice president, and we were a little bit hesitant. We were concerned that he wouldn't buy into what we wanted to do. And he started the meeting about how he's a great Formula One fan. And he had just read an article about how the Formula One team had run a model, basically there was a race going on and it started to drizzle. And each of the racers or the teams had to decide, do we just let them keep going in the drizzle, the cars, or is it worth it to bring it in to a pit stop and change the tires, right? So, you had this question of, do we leave them out there, but it might skid, or do we bring them in? And this VP had just read this article about how one of the teams had used the historical data and simulation and come up with a decision that you need to bring the car in to do the pit stop. And they did. And of course, that team won the race. And so the person was completely sold. And afterwards, I looked at one of my colleagues and I said, sometimes you get help from the strangest of places, right? But I would also say that, so the good news is people are hearing and learning about it externally, particularly, especially the senior management, but it's also been a challenge, right? We still get how come you're not using this tool? Right? I'm sure you remember those days, Arnie, at IBM, and we're just kind of looking at each other, at some of our colleagues, me and my colleagues, thinking, okay, who were they hearing this from, right? And it could be a board member, it could be some article they read, right? It could be that there was a news story about one of our competitors signed with a high-tech company, and then they want to know how come we didn't, what is our opinion of that and what's our strategy. So it's definitely a double-edged sword, the external, but obviously more positive than negative. I think one more comment about the senior support. We were an Edelman finalist in 2013. We won the Informs Prize, Chevron in 2015, and both of those really helped with the credibility and the reputation of the internal team. So by being recognized externally by a professional society such as Informs really was helpful to us in gaining the credibility of senior management.
Great answer. Okay, thank you so much. Let's focus a little now on the analytics organization that you described a little earlier. Would you please share your approach to building the analytics workforce? For example, are you hiring or growing your talent internally, or is it a combination of both?
Sure. So it's interesting, part of the opportunities I had in my career was to reinvent this math modeling team that we had in the 90s, right? And we did some things right, and we did some things that in retrospect weren't as good. But it's hard, it's hard to go back and think about what the constraints were at the time. So we absolutely were hiring externally. We're also developing internally. And that's kind of where I went with my comment about in the first incarnation, the manager was very specific about who could be on the team. You had to have a degree in operations research, statistics, maybe math, and essentially from a list of universities. And that certainly limited the growth, right? You had to be really good. So it's good if you're on the team, but on the other hand, it limited the growth. And so we have been very clear that it's very inclusive. We have a lot of smart people at Chevron. We have a lot of engineers, that have great analytical skills. So we have worked really hard to get the right mix of people. External, we hire a lot from universities, which brings in new approaches, new passion, new energy, that we all listen to. And we set up what we're calling a data science development program internally that we're very proud of. It's for employees, and it's a 6-month part-time program. And the first 3 months, it's lectures, weekly lectures with homework. And then they actually do a data science project. And this has been a great win for us. First of all, it helps with the consistency across the company. We've learned who to accept. We have prerequisites now. We didn't used to. But especially to bring in people from different parts of the company, and they can figure out how to apply this in their business, has been very helpful. And last year we put through close to 200 people through the program, and it's part-time, and some people just learn more about data science and how we're using it at Chevron. And other people, we recognize, wow, they have a lot of potential. And when jobs come up, we talk about moving them into more analytic or data science jobs. The other thing we do is we do internal data science competitions that are open to any employee. And once again, it's another example of telling people how we apply this at Chevron. But more importantly, we have found people in the company that have great skills that we didn't know about, particularly international folks. And it's been a real win, both of these programs.
Those are awesome ideas. I mean, from what I'm hearing, it's, one of the things I hear a lot from other practitioners is when they bring on a new person who's may have good analytic skills, good training, they don't know anything about the business. And it takes a long time to come up to speed and be able to actually use those skills effectively to solve real problems. But what you're describing is you already bring people who know the business into the fold, and then discover their strengths in through that program. I just think it's brilliant.
It's been very successful.
Yeah, awesome. And maybe it'll generate a few questions that we'll talk about at the end from the others on the call. Okay, so one of the things that another thing that I hear practitioners talk about a lot is the challenges that they encounter working across organizations. I mean, I know in my case, it was always challenging to work with IT. Now, the issue there was, the analytics group was building the model, creating a model, and then they had to integrate it typically into a large system. And therefore, they had to sort of get in line. We had to get in line with the analytics or the IT organization. So can you describe not just IT, but any other organizations within Chevron that you needed to build strong connections with, and how you in that way dealt with the challenges you encountered?
Sure. So I've actually always been in IT, so I have the opposite problem, right? Which is, wow, like what do you know about, drilling a well? What do you know about? So it's a different problem, right? It's equally large, right? So in other words, we often had the connections to be able to, to move it, to get it going within IT. But the real challenge was building the credibility that people like me could solve the business problems. And I will tell you that a lot of it is around the terminology, like when you're working with Chevron shipping, you call them ships, you don't call them boats. If you call them boats, you totally lose all credibility, and so part of it is taking the time to learn the workflow of the business, to learn the terminology, to ask questions, right? We live in a world now where you can go to YouTube and you can watch some pretty incredible videos and learn about things that you need to know about. It's also recognizing what you know and what you don't know, right? I mean, I will never learn as much as people who are in the field, drilling a well or in a refinery, right? So it is important to know what you know and what you don't know. It's important to ask questions. I would say over time, Arnie, the divide has actually gotten smaller between IT and the business, as we say. I mean, think about the IT skills that people in the business need to have now, right? It used to be kind of either or, but now they're much more blended skill set. We do specifically make sure we hire petroleum engineers into our team so that we can have some more of this cross pollination of ideas. But definitely, early on in my career, I was working on a refinery problem and somebody said, well, the math might work, Margery, but that's not how refinery works, right? So you have to make sure that the solution you develop actually can be implemented, right? And, I said, great, let's, tell me why, what about this makes you know that, right? And dig in and learn what you need to learn to be able to answer the questions. But in this world, I mean, we're all about this digital transformation. And as I said, everybody's needing to learn the IT skills. Everybody's needing to know the analytical, approaches and questions that we want to ask. So it's actually improved.
Okay, very interesting. So it's sort of a related question. There's so much going on in the, in your industry and in energy, related to what's happening in the environment, all these complications in the world today. In fact, just think about those of us on the East Coast right now are suffering from a certainly, 21st century, situation that we're experiencing with the distribution of gasoline. But so can you describe where analytics fits into that challenge, that set of challenges, and maybe provide some insights and how your work has impacted Chevron's maybe transition or decision making in
Sure. No, it's a great question. And, as you said, the energy industry is really in transition. And it is I would say it is our top focus, to lower the carbon intensity of our operations. We are very much working all hands on deck in multiple dimensions, right? We've made a couple announcements lately about partnerships where we're, sharing the carbon intensity of a cargo of LNG, to a company called Pavilion in Singapore. We've made announcements about investments that we're making in alternate sources of energy. But, like you said, behind all those decisions, there's an analysis, right? And so we're a big decision analysis company. So we have applied, decision quality in making the decisions about what sources of energy and what the opportunities are, from a predictive, from a data science perspective or, analytics perspective. We spend a lot, we are really focused on the data, right? Adding sensors to parts of our operations so that we can take a look at it and that we can predict, a failure that might result in, some more emissions. And so many different, just like everything else, there's a lot of opportunities. As I said, we're very much focused on, anything from predicting the demand, right? And worldwide demand of 7.5 billion people, and how it's going to grow over time. I mean, that's a lot of forecasting. We have models that do that, to looking at, okay, how are we going to meet that demand as a globe, right? In a way that we're lowering our carbon intensity. So many different opportunities to apply our skill set. And that's the thing about our skill set, Arnie, right? Times are good, we're in demand. Times are bad, right? People want, challenging, right? Let's put it that way. Oil prices go down, our team is still in demand, right? They're just different types of problems. And like this one, it's a different problem, but as I mentioned, all hands on deck. We are very much focused on this.
Very interesting. So what I guess I'm interested in, considering you've been, a long career in a single organization, from the perspective you have now, sort of knowing what you know now, is there anything you might have done differently in how you built your organization or operated, or how would you what would you have done differently?
So I think about this question, especially, mentoring others, right? What did I learn in my career that I can pass on to others? And the beauty, as I mentioned before, is that I feel like we had a second chance, right, of building this organization. And we learned, at least I in particular, learned a lot from the first incarnation of the math modeling team. So there's really nothing big I would say I would do differently. There were times when I needed to put myself on the line, and I did. And what does that mean? I felt like we needed to go here in the organization, and I needed to be very clear. I'm in if we go there. I'm not in if we don't go there. And that definitely communicated to the right people that, wow, this is important, right? So that's, something I think I did right. It's hard to look back on different decisions and really remember all of the forces that were pro and con, and the emotions at the time. One thing I would definitely do a little differently is, and Arnie, I'm sure you've had the same experience. It's sometimes, it's so clear to you where the organization needs to go, and it's not clear to other people. And all of a sudden you realize you're the only one pushing, and you need to stop, and you need to say, oh, I need to, as they say, bring people along, or I need to be more patient, right? And we still got there. I think it just took a little bit more personal toll than it needed to. If I had recognized sooner, hey, you just need to be patient. You need to bring people along. As I say, for a while, I looked at people as, okay, this is somebody we can go around. This is somebody we need to bring along. And to really understand the difference is important.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, sort of knowing the internal strategy of your organization, and who, obviously some people you need to be a little more assertive with, maybe others it's the, carrot and stick idea a little bit, but interesting. Okay, so I do have, before we go to questions from the audience, what does the future look like in your view for analytics at Chevron? And are there plans, for example, for robots to replace people on their jobs? That sort of wild thing.
Well, I mean, I tell people internally, I think the future's never been brighter for analytics, data science, operations, research at this company, right? I mean, we are generating so much data from the sensors. We have so much unstructured data, from images and videos and PDFs, right? Huge opportunity to expand and improve our decision quality, to lower our carbon footprint. And so I really do think it's a great opportunity. As to me, it's very exciting because, as I say, individual contributors, I mean, we've never been in a spot to make this huge impact on this company. And so that's very exciting. As for robots, I mean, we certainly work on, kind of automating workflows, like with robotic process automation. But if, we are in a very high risk business, right? So on the one hand, the opportunity to use a robot instead of a human in a high risk environment is very interesting, right? And huge opportunity to lower to increase the safety. But on the other hand, it is a high risk business, and we need to make sure that robot is going to do the right thing, right? So in other words, it's going to be a while, I think. I think that, yes, we are working on doing a little bit more like semi-automated, but to get to the point where we have robots running things, it's going to be a while. I mean, think about automated cars, right? We've been talking about that for a long time, starting to see it mainstream, but it's still going to be a long time.
Okay.
I think, right.
So I think it's a good time now, almost exactly on time, at the 40-minute point in our discussion, to open it up for questions from the audience. And we have a few, as I said earlier, maybe some people missed this, that if we have a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and so we're looking primarily there. Maybe some of you put a question in the chat. We'll look at both of them, but I'll start off with this question from Don Kleinmetz, who asks, the COVID pandemic has had a major impact on Chevron's business. Could you talk about the impact that this has had on the analytics functions at Chevron? Have your problems changed? Has your staff composition changed? What sort of tools are you using?
So thanks, Don. The types of problems have changed. So let me just start over again. Like everybody, the world is completely different than it was before the pandemic, right? We have additional problems that we're being asked to solve that we weren't asked to solve before. I mean, a year ago, we were asked to predict, where the pandemic was headed. And you would say, well, there are people outside Chevron doing that, but we wanted to take it down to a county level before other people were doing that, so that we could really understand the impact on the workforce, right? So we could, predict the infections and understand where, I mean, it's a worldwide operation, where it was going to be impacted, so that we could focus our area. I mean, it's very concerned about the employees. We're concerned about continuing the operation. So we certainly did some planning in that regard, about first trying to predict, and then, as the models externally became more granular, we can leverage those. But it was all around understanding the impact to the operations and making sure that we could be ready. So it was a new project, right? And so other than that, sure, when it happened in last March, we started to have to pay people for one brief period of time to take the oil from us, as opposed to, selling it to people, because there was so much inventory. And I would say that we took that as an opportunity to really understand things differently. right? Rather than looking at, say, upstream, which is the part of the business where we look for the oil and we produce it, we pull it out of the ground, versus downstream, which is where we, bring in this crude oil and manufacture it and then, sell it to terminals and then service stations. We looked at it all together, the entire value chain. It really precipitated, we always knew we should, but there were some challenges in terms of silos. There were challenges in terms of the data. But I would say that the pandemic really prompted us to say, wow, we need to look at this whole thing, because if we start to shut down this, what's it going to do to the refinery capacity, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the big difference now.
Okay, interesting. So there's a couple of questions that were sort of along the same lines. One from Doug Samuelson, one from Irv Lustig, that basically I'll ask the same question. Do you still use the term operations research at Chevron? Or with everything under the data science umbrella, has OR as a term gone away and has just been folded under that umbrella?
It's been folded under that umbrella. Those of us that have OR degrees, we're still very much excited to talk about it. And absolutely, step one, as we know from the informs process, which we use at Chevron, step one is understanding the business problem that we're trying to solve. And step two is translating it into analytics formulation. And step one, we still say, okay, what we have a toolbox, anything from, linear programming, discrete event simulation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, statistics, et cetera. What's the right tool? And those of us that have the right, the degree in the discrete event simulation, the more OR focused, those practitioners will get those types of projects. So we still use operations research, especially, decision analysis. We still use, that's kind of a sister team. But we don't say those, we don't usually call it operations research.
Okay, interesting. So here's I don't have it's an anonymous person sent this question. I find that one of the biggest internal challenges with trying to sell analytics projects to corporate is to estimate the dollar values, especially on new problems that did not have a benchmark. Most times the values estimated by outside consultants were inflated for obvious reasons. What has been your experience with identifying the dollar values and creating buy-in, especially for the team that is far away from the production wellheads like this?
This is a great question. It's something I've spent a lot of time on, as well as some of my colleagues. So, take us back to 2013 when we were building this capability, and the question was, well, what's the value, right? And we actually had a target, how much we wanted the team to generate. I think it was $5 million the first year, and we generated 10 million. But what does that mean, right? So we think of it in terms of buckets, right? I mean, there's the value of increasing our revenue, right? For example, we pull more oil out of the ground sooner, right? I mean, that would be the acceleration. That's just an example. The second one is, cost efficiency, right? We're lowering our costs, right? We're doing something. We're drilling a well in this shorter period of time, right? So that we definitely lowering our costs. And then the third one is cost avoidance, right? Particularly around an incident, we're avoiding an incident, or so those are the three main buckets. We actually work with the business, in that first step when we're trying to frame the business problem. We have a dialogue with the business to say how much value is this going to generate for Chevron, and what is the value, and we frame it in those three buckets. Obviously, there's a fourth bucket around it's going to save people time, right? That's one, we try to stay away from, just because Sure, it's going to save people time, but then you have this conversation about, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to lower manpower? No, we're not going to lower any manpower. Well, then doesn't really affect the bottom line at Chevron, right? So we would much rather have the conversation be around how can data science bring value to Chevron? Are we increasing revenue? Are we decreasing costs? Are we avoiding something, rather than, are we saving somebody 2 hours worth of time or 6 hours worth of time? And what does that really mean? So a couple of different things we learned over the years was yes, it is important to have a target, and to be able to articulate the value. The second thing is that it needs to come from the recipient and not from us in terms of that dollar value. And then another thing is we really wanted to be conservative in our estimates, right? And for example, this whole conversation around, well, how much of it is actually due to the analytics, right? The project might be $10 million, but how much is due to the analytics, right? So our approach was to be conservative, to go low on that percentage, so that the conversation is around the work and how we can bring value, and not, hey, is it 5 million or is it 6.7 million? The other thing we've learned, which we're struggling with now a little bit, is sure, it's good to have this value target, but it does change our behavior, right? It means that we work on smaller projects that deliver value quicker. And now that we're 6-7 years into this data science journey, we're understanding the implications of that. As the team has gotten bigger, it's enabled us to do bigger projects that deliver value over a longer period of time. But we're trying to be very conscious of how is this changing our behavior, and is it doing the most we can do for Chevron?
Okay, great. The next question I was going to ask, you may have already answered this one sort of, but I'll put it out there if you can add a little more. Sean Mack asks, what specific strategies do you use to sell the analytics capabilities to leaders within Chevron?
It's all around explaining how we've used it in similar areas at Chevron, or externally, right? How others are using it. It's a challenge. It always has been, and I'm sure, Arnie, you've had the same experience, right? There's people that get it quickly and people that don't. We used to say we could give the same, it's all about timing, right? We could give the same presentation to the same people one month, and they don't understand. We think it's really clear. We're explaining all these problems that are similar to your problem, right? But the light bulb doesn't go off. And then 3 months later, we give the exact same presentation, and the same people are like, wow, this is really, we could do this. And a lot of it is timing, right? It's for some reason, maybe that morning they had gotten an email about this and understood this connection. I do think the external visibility of our skill set has been very helpful to us. But I wish I had a better answer, but it really is about explaining similar problems that we have solved, and hoping, and digging in. I mean, I think other things would be, doing a proof of concept, right? Building a quick model so that you could show them. Showing is much better than telling, right? And I mean, I'll tell you what good looks like. You solve a problem for one business leader, and then you're in another meeting with that person and a new business leader, and that first person that you solved the problem for actually interrupts you to tell you the value of this work and how they used it.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing.
That's what good looks like.
That's a big win. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know I struggled a lot with, what level in the organization do you really talk to? Because sometimes you may have sold the lower level in the organization, but they weren't incentivized, whatever, for whatever reason, to go to sell the real decision makers at a higher level.
Right.
And that strategy, that is the strategy of how you manage the stakeholders that are all through the organization, is really one of the hardest things, I think, for practitioners to get their hands around. But it sounds like you've got great strategies there. I'm going to read one other question here. There may be time for two. As someone who comes from the oil and gas industry myself, this is an anonymous person, so we don't know exactly who this is. A lot of non-core businesses are usually the first to get right-sized in a low commodity price climate. What would be the strategies for data scientists to develop career longevity in companies that are always susceptible to external influences and shareholders' pressure?
So it's true. I mean, we are in a commodity business, and oil prices go up, oil prices go down, gas prices up, down, and, all kinds of external influences. Some, most that we can't control, right? So I do think, it's back to my earlier comment that with our skill set, we are needed in good in rich environments and in challenging environments, right? And if we just went through a transformation to make us to more efficient, and we have a great reputation internally for the value, the credibility that we built, the value that we can deliver to the company. And, there the challenge is, hey, it's not just data science, right? There's data engineers that help, right? There's software engineers, right? It's explaining, hey, all these skill sets are somewhat dependent upon each other. You can't get too far in one without recognizing, hey, we actually need more data engineers now, right? So build your credibility, right? That's what I would say to a data science practitioner. Be able to articulate the value that you bring to the company. If you can't do that, nobody's going to do it for you. And I do think we weren't talking about downsizing the data scientists in this recent reorganization, which I thought was a great testimony to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's an interesting question brought by Doug Samuelson. Have you thought about recruiting a few analysts from the Indian tribes who own substantial oil resources and supporting education programs for those tribes?
So I have not heard of that. I'm happy to talk to our corporate affairs team and see if they have done that or not. I would say we've certainly done a lot of social investment in other countries that we operate in terms of building schools and hospitals. So I do not know if we have done this with the Indian tribes. So I'll look into it.
Okay, thank you. And I think there's one last question. Then I'm going to check the chat if there's any in there. Bhaskar Kumar asks, I'm curious if any conservation initiatives at Chevron see benefits of data science at this time, related sort of to some stuff you've already said, but maybe you can say a few more words.
Yes, we used to have a team, a group that was what we were focused on. That's what the team was focused on. In other words, it was external. It was a service that they provided. I mean, I remember one of our customers was the U.S. Postal Service, where we would look at, the operations, the buildings, et cetera, to make recommendations to lower the consumption of energy. Absolutely, internally, we spent a lot of time on that, on our own conservation of energy. And then yes, it's a great analytical challenge, right? To say, okay, this is the sources, these are the costs, right? these are the things that we could do to reduce them, and which it's the cost benefit analysis. So absolutely a lot of focus on conservation.
Okay, interesting. Now there's one question I noticed in the chat from John Milne, who asked, how did the pandemic remote work change how you worked with clients and OR folks? What worked well remotely and what poorly?
Okay, so as a company, we still had 30% of our workforce going in, right, to the refinery, to the plant, to the wellhead. So it was only us office workers that have been able to work remotely, and it's been, in a lot of ways, it's been seamless, right? We were a Microsoft shop, and so all of a sudden everybody's on Teams, and it has been very seamless in that regard. In terms of, I think the challenge now really is we're all still here at home, and we have been able to do quite a bit. I would say really there wasn't a hiccup in the operations research and the analytics work. The challenge in my mind right now is, I think we've all been doing it for so long, and it was an uptick in business, and people are tired, and people have, particularly with working for a global company, sometimes you have meetings in the morning, with Europe, and in the day and late afternoon and evening in Asia. And it's just, but it's the same challenge that everybody has, right? So I would say from the analytics perspective, we've been able to continue, but it's just I think the fatigue that we are feeling, just like so many other people.
Okay, well, I think we've answered all the questions that have been submitted, and I think it's right on time for our planned 1-hour webinar. So I think it's a good time to first thank Margery for joining us and with all of your great insights and experience and sharing them with the group of folks who have listened to the webinar. I really appreciate that. And I'll put in a quick plug for our next webinar, which will be in 2 months, in July. You'll see information about it, but we're going to have Erica Clampel from Ford as our guest, and looking forward to that conversation as well. So anyway, thank you all for joining, and thank you especially Margery for the great insights. Thank you.
Well, thanks a lot.
Okay, bye.
Bye.